Hey guys, so we just had Euros as well as the Oceanic Championships this past weekend, so as usual I wanted to go over some of the most played hand traps and staples among these topping lists to help you prepare for your next big event, particularly the North American WCQ, which is happening this weekend, which I'll also be attending. So before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual. Links and discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh supplies below. And also a particular thanks to Imperium Duelist for the awesome hookup. They have some really amazing outer sleeves as well as deck boxes. You can check out imperiumduelist.com and use my code HAKUNA10 for 10% off. I also want to highlight some really amazing resources for meta content in terms of deck lists. Definitely make sure to check these sources out, and I'll link everything below. So this is of course the top cut breakdown at Euros. I wasn't really able to find the one for Oceanic Championships, but anyways, not too surprising. Kashtira was predominantly the most represented deck in top cut, but also Dragonlink and Runick, I'm guessing, really more so represents Spright, and also Floowandereeze and Rikka and Branded being in there in terms of one of the meta contenders, and of course Rikka winning the actual event thanks to Jess. And so in terms of the topping list that were publicly available that I could include in this video, this was the breakdown, and you'll notice that Spright is actually more dominant in this in terms of the lists that were included. My suspicion is that probably at this point, people with like Kashtira tops, maybe they don't do as many deck profiles, or they don't receive as many deck profiles because, by and large, a lot of those lists are the same. And maybe you can kind of say the same for Spright, but there are at least different Spright variants. So definitely keep these things in mind as you look through some of the most played hand traps and staples that I'll be going over. It does sometimes partly have to do with the type of deck that's actually played. So in terms of the hand trap overview, it ranged from 0 to 18 with a median of 6 hand traps in the main. This is actually essentially the same as what we saw just a couple of weeks ago when I did this in terms of regional national level event tops. And also in the side range from 0 to 9 with a median of 5, and this was also actually about the same as a couple of weeks ago. And so usually when I do these, you do see some kind of trend going up or down, but this time it was actually pretty stable. In terms of going second board breakers, the median was 6, which is a little bit higher than a few weeks ago when I did this analysis among national events, as well as board breakers in the side was about 5.5, which is around the same as last time I did this analysis as well. So in terms of most common hand traps, let's just start with Ash. And so this is not too surprising in terms of number 1, but what is actually surprising and interesting to me is the fact that if Ash was played in the decks, it was sided in a third of them. And so for a lot of you that might not seem like a big deal, but to me it kind of is a very interesting trend, because predominantly when I've been doing these analysis for the last 3 years now, Ash, if it was ever played, it was only main deck. So now we're kind of getting to this situation where, Ash might not be very high impact against a lot of decks, but it actually is worth siding still because of certain decks like Branded and Labrynth, where this card is very high impact against. So for me personally, I think it's really cool to see that kind of trend change from a historical perspective. And then we have Ghost Bell. This has been increasing in play the last couple formats now. Pretty good right now, right? I mean, it can hit a lot of decks. Maybe not as generic as Ash, but still pretty up there. Branded and Bestial, or rather Branded and Labrynth. It's very good against them. And against Bestials, actually, you can protect yourself against Bestials using Ghost Bell. And you can technically also protect from a Call by the Grave as well, but that's a little sacky. But you know what? This definitely has a lot of applications in this current format. And then we have Imperm, which is usually one of the most played hand traps, so that's not too surprising. We're in a format where Talents is played a lot, so Imperm does play around that because it's a literal trap. The interesting thing with this too is that, it's always been a card that's either just main decked or not played at all, so this has stayed the same in terms of that trend, but Ash has not. So who knows, maybe in the future we'll also see Imperm become a card that maybe it's worth enough, siding against certain decks in the future. And then we have Nibiru. This is really funny to me because every single time I do this kind of analysis, you will see Nibiru, not played much at all, and then the very next tournament of events, you see it play a lot. And that's kind of like that paradoxical relationship Nibiru always has in the meta, because, when it's not very good, people kind of, undermine it and play, not play around Nib rather, and then they get heavily punished, and Nibiru starts coming back in play, and then once everyone starts playing around Nibiru again, then it becomes not good, and then it falls out of play. So it constantly goes up and down, even within the same format, I find. And then we have Bestial. I put the Magma picture here, but really it actually represents more so all Bestials in general. Like realistically, it's just Magma and Druid's that's actually sided in decks that are not, something like Dragonlink, which are going to main deck it because it's part of their core engine. Obviously, there's something like Serenir and Baldrake too, but that's not really played in decks that are not Dragonlink. And let's say, for example, Branded, they play Serenir because those are key engine pieces. But Bestial's kind of an interesting situation right now. It is good against decks where it's good, a very high impact rather. Let's say something like Branded, even against Labrynth, it can definitely come up. But at the same time, it's kind of weird because you have decks now like, let's say, Rikka and Floowandereeze. They did really well at Euros, and those are decks that, you know, Bestials just don't do absolutely anything against. So it's kind of like hit or miss kind of situation. So I can kind of see why this might be going a little bit down, but you know what? I think for now, it's still going to stick around. Next, we do have Droll, and this is, I guess, still within like top 10. So, I mean, it's certainly nowhere near like the #1 played hand trap that we saw during like that very brief Pearly and super heavy Samurai format when they were tier 1. It's still pretty solid. I mean, against certain decks, you know, let's say like against Labrynth, it's really not going to do much at all. Against Kashtira and Floowandereeze, it can be very good, except if you're under shifter, not going to matter. Against Branded, people a lot of times I find shrug it off and say Droll is terrible against it. It really depends. There are certain times where it can affect them, and I'm actually seeing a lot of Branded lists go back to playing something like the Fright for package, or just playing like a 60 card gas bid, which will search and draw a lot, particularly with like something like a Lure on top of that. So definitely can be situational. Shifter is still in there. Obviously, we have like the rise of Floowandereeze again, and that's going to be a shifter, at least in the side. It's mostly a side deck card now, just because, you know, the best deck in Kashtira, they also banished, so there's not really much of a point to main decking it, although some might still main deck it, as you see in the graphic, because against most of the decks, it does just absolutely crap on them. So hopefully, this is a card that might get addressed in the next ban list. I'm not sure. You know, Gamma is at 1 now, so it makes it even harder to stop this card, and it really just completely changes the gameplay for that turn. So, but you know what, I guess open for it to stay around a little bit longer. And then we have Chaos Hunter. Not played that much, but I did find it kind of interesting that it saw play at all. Originally, when we last saw this kind of pop up was when Joshua Schmidt and one Runick, I believe, or maybe it was just regular Spright. I can't remember at this point, but he basically showed how, you know, Mannequin Cat can like target the opponent's shifter, and then now you can summon that Chaos Hunter, and your opponent just cannot banish anymore. So that's really, really key. I'm guessing, you know, it can be good against Floowandereeze as well as Kashtira. And then you have something like, let's say in tier format, Ishizu tier format. I did a profile with Hanko, and he actually showed how this can also be pretty relevant in the mirror as well. For example, your opponent not being able to use like Bestials or being able to use their Grave Shufflers at all because they're under Chaos Hunter, and when you summon Chaos Hunter from your hand, you might have actually pitched like an Agido, for example. So it can was kind of potentially relevant in that format as well. Right now, maybe not as much, but definitely at least coming back a little bit in play. And then we have some other hand traps that weren't played that much, honestly. Veiler, Ogre, there was even like Ghost Warner as well as Retaliating Seed that was also seen in just like one list at least among the lists that were publicly available. Not too much to say about these cards. I mean, if you're going to play Veiler, I think at this point, you might as well play Imperm because we are in Talents format, and you know what, Imperm, or rather Veiler, like it's usually not like super high impact. Next, we're going to go with the board breakers, the most common ones, and we're starting off with Dark Ruler, which is not surprising, but I guess one thing that might be a little surprising is that how much it's shifted in terms of being main decked rather than side deck than compared to, you know, what we saw in the last time I did this analysis. So in that sense, though, it's also, I guess I could also argue that it's maybe not that surprising because we have seen this before. When Spright was first tier 1, that format powered elements last summer, a lot of people were main decking Dark Ruler as because, you know, it is a going second card, but it doesn't matter. A lot of decks nowadays in the current meta, at least in the last couple of years now, like they have so many flex spots, and they can play so well with, you know, let's say one dead card in Dark Ruler when they ended up going first because they won that roll. Like in the event that they do lose that roll, it can really shift things, and it's a very strong card. And Droplet is not seeing much play right now, and it usually always kind of flips back between these two depending on the kind of format and the type of board that the opponent builds. Droplet can be pretty nice too against certain decks. Let's say like against something like Branded, I can stop Gimmick Lock with the stopping of the Sanctifier, but you know what, for now I can see why Dark Ruler is so high. And then we have some back row removal in terms of Feather Duster as well as Cosmic Cyclone. Not too much to say than what I've already said. I think, you know, Cyclone, especially going first, the fact that you can use it, it's really relevant in the current format. And now you've seen Rikka dominate the Euros, and, you know, trying to get rid of that field spell is very critical, especially when they're trying to go second. That can just kind of like eat up your board. And of course, against any kind of Runick strategy, Cosmic Cyclone is always very nice. And then we have Talents. As I mentioned, we're in just like that Talents format. The last couple formats now, it's very strong, mostly main decked. And, you know, if you are going to use a hand trip, you better hope that it was a high impact one, because if you get Talents and get hand ripped, then you just lost another card, and it's probably going to make it really hard for you to win, and you can get very heavily punished in today's game. And then we have Evenly Match, which is not too surprising, really like the best generic board wipe card, I guess, outside of Dark Ruler, although in combination with the two, it's really like the deadliest duo that you can really ask for going second. So I don't think there's too much to say other than the fact that, there's even a few lists main decking this card in this format. We kind of saw this briefly last couple formats as well, but I think this card is here to stay for a while. And then we have Thrust, which is related to talents. I mean, this card is really strong, can be good going first or second. Going first can be quite deadly if you have actual specific cards that you're searching off of. Let's say something like, the D barrier, or in Branded, I'm actually finding that if they are playing Thrust, they're probably playing Fusion Duplication, which essentially means they're going to Branded Fusion on your opponent's turn because they got Ash on their own turn, for example. So Thrust is definitely really strong, especially like, let's say, going second. You can search something like Evenly, Dark Ruler, or even Talents, really, and just kind of start cracking boards from there. And then we have Book of Moons still. This has been quite popular for the last couple of months now, and particularly in like something like Kashtira, you see it a lot. But you know what, in let's say Floowandereeze, they usually play this as well. Even though they have Advent, they just provides another way to dodge something like Imperm, but also going second, being able to shut things off is pretty good. And you know what, against certain combo decks, like being able to Book of Moon that first normal summon and stopping them from being able to link summon can be kind of turn ending in a lot of decks. And then we have Kurkar Div Incarnate, which is a very, very strong board breaker, kind of unique in the sense, and I actually realized that I didn't see too much kaiju this time around, even though last time I did it, we saw a lot of kaijus, but I guess maybe this sort of kind of picked up as one of the more popular choices. Obviously, I know we didn't have a lot of Vanquish Soul, but this is a card that Vanquish Soul plays quite a lot, actually, because it is a fire attribute as an added bonus. So, really unique kind of card that can crack boards, revive your opponent's monsters in the grave, can really add a beefy body. And the interesting thing with this right now also is that because it's like a level 1, let's say if your opponent plays something like Grave of the Super Ancient Organism, at least it can play around it, and you have a very big level 1 body that you can start attacking with. And then we have Pancratops. This has kind of become popular the last month or so. It's sort of coming back in play after kind of dropping off a lot ever since something like Fenrir came out. So it's still really strong. It's still only at 1, unfortunately, but it can out back row out monsters, and it's also a big monster attack to boot, so you can really clear a lot of things. And then we have Lightning Storm. Of course, it's semi-limited, but you know what, still pretty relevant in this current format. For the most part, just being able to get rid of back row Labrynth is still a thing. And like I mentioned, again, something like Rikka, now that it's something that you do have to really prepare for, you do really have to try to prioritize getting rid of that field spell when you're going second. And then we're going to move on to Eradicator. Definitely not a card you want to see that high. And it's interesting because it's not just Labrynth that play this. In the topping lists that were available, I know at least one Dragon Link played it. I know sometimes Branded can play it, as well as sometimes Spright play it, because they can get that gigantic to 3200. So it's a really crazy good card if you can get it off. Really, honestly, at this point, you can't really stop it because Red Reboot's gone. Like, yes, you can play Cross Out for the Eradicator. But you know what, this card, for the most part, calling spells, you're probably losing. Next, we have Grave of the Super Ancient Organism, which I did kind of briefly allude to earlier. So this card is really strong against something like Branded, for example. And so, you know what? Whether going first or second is really good. So if you're going second against Branded, you really should side deck this card, because it doesn't matter if you get Gimmick Lock. Sure, you can't special summon or play on your turn, but you just set this card, flip on your opponent's turn, and the Branded player probably won't be able to play it, honestly. Now, speaking of another card that just kills Branded, is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Kind of surprising that it's actually fallen a lot in terms of play, because I think it's a pretty strong side card. But you know what? There's only so many cards that you can side in. I can kind of see why maybe this doesn't make the priority list. But you know what? If you do have room, this card is pretty strong right now. And then speaking of strong, we also have Solemn Judgment. Usually is going to be one of the better going first generic side choices that you can fit in your side deck. You know what? Whether you're a back row deck or a combo deck, you're probably considering playing this card. It just adds just another layer of protection, and realistically probably going to win that game when you resolve it. And lastly, we do have Lava Golem seen in 5 lists. There were also other cards that were seen in 5 lists as well, such as something like Call by the Grave, as well as Book of Eclipse. Lava Golem, I think, is pretty interesting. It is kind of specific to only certain decks that can play it, because it does prevent you from normal summoning that turn, but you can actually special summon multiple Lava Golems, so that's kind of interesting. It can also burn your opponents. You just have to be able to deal with the big body, but you know what? If it's coming down to time, this card can be a better option. And then finally, I wanted to go over some tech choices that I thought were interesting that I saw in some of the smaller number of lists. And the first one is Destructive Daruma Karma Cannon. And so, you know, usually you only predict, or rather expect this from Labrynth, but I actually saw this in some other decks, such as something like Dragonrider or Branded or Spright. It was kind of an interesting choice. It's basically, you know, flips everything face down on both fields, and then if there's anything left face up, so essentially for the most part, like Link monsters, the player will have to send it away, which also means because it's the player that has to send it away, something, a tower, like let's say a Rivaling Nister as an example, that would still have to get sent to the graveyard as well. So I think it's a pretty interesting choice that there are several lists that were playing it. I believe at least 4 lists were playing it. Banshee plus Zombie World. Now this is a tech specifically for Branded, and it's a tech that we've seen before actually a year ago when Floowandereeze was like tier 1 deck, and so we're kind of back to, while Floowandereeze is not tier 1, we're kind of back to the part where, you know, there's a lot of Dragon Link as well as Floowandereeze again, where they really need their typing. So being able to send Banshee through Branded Fusion and then, you know, just banishing that off to put that Zombie World there is kind of a neat choice right now. I'm not sure if that also affects Rikka. I really should read those cards at this point, but someone let me know in the comments. And then the last tech choice I noticed personally, I'm not sure how common this is going to be because it was only seen in one Kashtira list, was that I noticed they actually played Pathfinder with Secret Village as spellcasters, and I was trying to see why, and I realized Big Eye is a spellcaster. Not sure why, it does not look like one at all, but at the same time, so maybe this is kind of an interesting choice that you can consider in your Kashtira list, because Secret Village can be pretty deadly against a lot of decks if they just don't have any spellcasters. So anyways guys, that was it for the breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples at Euros as well as the Oceanic Championships. Hopefully that was helpful in helping you build that deck list, especially as you prepare for your next events. And so for those of you going to North American WCQ, hope to see a lot of you there. I will be flying out tomorrow actually at the time of recording. Big thanks to all of you for watching. A huge thanks to all my Patreons for the continued support. Really means a lot, and well, take care guys.